There's this sort of myth about being an artist that you are either driven to make art or that you sort of live and breathe for your art. I did art well enough and I didn't do anything else well. So I said, I'll go to art school, I'll study art. It's a way that we are no longer separate in our little husks.
Welcome back, everyone, to We Are Mentally United podcast. Tonight, I'm very excited to have a very special guest with me here. Someone who's been in our circle for quite a bit since we've started the production of Psychedelics, a journey. Tonight, we have Rebecca here, and I'm so excited. Rebecca, you're an artist, you're an art therapist, you're a founder, co-founder of so many different things. I can't wait to dive all into it. But for folks who might not know you, please briefly introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me, Naomi, and it's lovely to meet all of you out there. Hopefully, I'll get to meet you in person at some point. And yes, I'm an art therapist. That's been my career for probably about 32 to 35 years. I sometimes forget what year it is, but for a very long time, more than half of my life. And I'm also an artist. And I really believe in the creative process, also understand the challenges of the creative process. And recently, I have pivoted really to the ways that psychedelics can inform creativity and art, and then vice versa, how art and creativity bring something new and different to the psychedelic experience or to psychedelic work. And then there's lots of other things that I could tell you about myself. I'm out in the Arizona desert right now. I have the blessing of being warm during the day. It's rough right now for many people, at least now in February of 2026. When you see this podcast, it might be another time. But yes, it's very lovely out here in the desert. And I have cats and a husband.
Oh, thank you for that lovely
Yeah,
introduction, Rebecca. Yeah, we have cats in our house too, and it's just like it's such a
yeah,
delight, honestly.
yeah.
And even within the context of this channel, it keeps like so much of the anxiety and stressors away, like when you just cuddle them. Um, right?
And so amazing. They're yeah. Anyway, I
Yeah.
love that you have cats. I remember seeing your cats the first time you
In
and I
our
saw
previous
yeah,
meeting.
absolutely. We had them visiting us, so yeah.
I love that for us. Um, Also, like you said, it's the middle of winter, but here in well, you're in Arizona, we're in Colorado. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it. So sorry, we're enjoying our sunshine a little bit. But I want to ask you a little bit about, how your connection with creativity, how your journey as an artist kind of started. What paved the path for that? Were you always a creative?
So I would say I'm an identical twin, and I was always the one that was sort of the creative one, and I'm not sure that how you sort of fall into things sometimes in your life. It, it there was a way that I didn't seem to be able to do a lot else well. I'm smart, but I had a really hard time in school, and art just came naturally for me. But I have to say that the reason I got into art therapy, and you were probably going to ask me this eventually, but that is that there's this sort of myth about being an artist that you are either driven to make art or that you sort of live and breathe for your art. And I, I always felt inclined and had a visual aesthetic in my life. I felt inclined to do artwork, but I didn't want to live the artist life. And so later in my life, as I have become, you could call me an expert, let's say, in creativity, I understand that being an artist is very different things for people. And so for me, I like to do art, and I have some talent, which is something that you can you can build, you can learn how to do art better. Uh, but um, I really enjoy doing it with other people, and I like to make what I call small art, which is art that is about responding to an experience or like a series of drawings that might all kind of complement each other. So I moved away from, the painting behind me is a piece that I made when I was younger, and everything was about big art and important art. So this is a long way of saying that I'm an artist of a type. And I think there are many ways to be an artist, and that's one of the things that I really enjoy exploring with people, and so I'll go into that a little bit later if you're curious.
Incredible. Yeah, absolutely. Was there a point at which you kind of saw and decided like this is my thing. I'm gonna dive more into this?
There was definitely, I mean, I sort of naturally went I did art well enough, and I didn't do anything else well, so I said, "I'll go to art school, I'll study art." And then when I finished, college, I wasn't really quite sure what to do with myself, so I started working in galleries, which, is something that oftentimes people do, and it wasn't until I was in my later 20s that I found art therapy, and
Mhm.
that made sense to me because when I was in college, I'd studied psychology as well. I always thought that the way that people's minds worked, was fascinating to me. I was interested in philosophy and sort of bigger questions like, "Why are we here?" and "What's going on?" Uh, and so finding a way that my artistic interest and talent could sort of be diverted into a place that was more congruent with how I wanted to be with art, which is how can you use this to understand yourself and other people better, if that makes sense. So that was in my later 20s, and that's when it kind of clicked for me, and I felt like, all right, so I'm an artist, but my interest is going to go towards using this to work with people and help them to understand themselves and to work with myself.
That's absolutely incredible. And you've gone on to do just that. You know, you're hosting several workshops every month or so from just what I could see on, different social media all over your website. And then, of course, you've been practicing art therapy. It's been part of your career. Tell me a little bit about, what kind of influenced you to realize your purpose to that was like helping people and like helping people with this gift that you have. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Sure. Well, I did. My company is Creative Wellbeing Workshops, so I definitely um, do run a lot of workshops. And the reason that I do that is that when you are in groups, oftentimes you there's a way that we learn and we experience ourselves differently when we are able to see ourselves through the eyes of others. And so when you make a piece of artwork, um, you're you're essentially creating this object. I'm trying to think if I might even show you a piece of artwork that I made at in the I don't know if you know Alex and Allison Gray, but they host they're some of the most famous visionary artists, and so they host monthly art churches. So you can attend these, and basically people hang out together and they make art. And so their theme was relationships, because we're sort of going into that month of relationships in February. So I made this one about um,
Wow.
the sort of the yin yang, because I'm a twin and I'm married, and it's different than the normal yin yang. And I just started putting colors in it. But the reason I show you that is that this thing is an aspect of my consciousness, but it's outside of me. So you're looking at it, Naomi. I'm looking at it. And we're both looking at something that we know relates to Rebecca, but it also is outside of Rebecca. And so I can look at it like this and I can say, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." Um, and you may notice things about it that I didn't notice because it's made by me and I'm not always aware, even though I'm an artist and I have some degree of control because I'm a trained artist. There's a lot of it that is outside of my control, just like psychedelics. So there's a way that we're kind of opening up and we're loosening things up, and then it comes out onto the page. And then it's there for us to have an exchange. I get to look at myself and learn something about myself because what was originally just a thought, I'm thinking about my relationships. It then becomes, and it was so interesting because I started out with this, but then all of this came in, and I thought, this is all the people. Now, at another time of my life, it might just have been about this. But, I'm older and the community makes a difference and the rest of the world. So that's what that is. So, but, there's all sorts of things in that image that can be unpacked. And so I forgot what your original question was, but I think it had something to do with like you know, uh, why do this? Well, it's you get this thing that you get to exchange with, and then other people as well. So you're now when you're in community, you're seeing the person and then you're seeing what they made.
That's beautiful. Um, and I feel like that goes pretty well into what I wanted to discuss around like your practice specifically as like art therapy. Can you tell our audience who might not be like too familiar? I feel like you already described it quite a bit, but what makes like art therapy different like traditional talk therapy?
I mean, it's because I'm glad you asked it because in some ways I'm kind of going into the weeds of it. But to pull back, this is a great question because most people don't know what art therapy is, and they might immediately presume that it was something that probably was with kids because we know that children enjoy doing artwork. Adults usually, unless they consider themselves to be artists, oftentimes they haven't done art since they were a child. What art does is it has sort of different functions. The first is when you do art, it comes from you are engaging a different part of the brain. We used to think of it as right and left, but it's really different parts. It's not just one part of the brain. But it is a part of the brain that doesn't censor our thoughts. So it comes out sort of unfiltered, if you will. But while you're making it, it is also relaxing your body. So there's a way that it induces, especially if you do it for a while and it's kind of a repetitive action, like scribbling or, these circles where I'm just kind of filling them in. That repetitive motion will relax the body and the mind. So for people who are very agitated, distressed, something has really activated their either fight, flight, or freeze, or it's maybe a little bit lower than that, but they're extremely worried and their whole body is activated. This can relax them. So that's number one. Number two is that it gets things that were inside out. We call that expression. So you're just getting inside out. So sometimes when we're just talking, there's a way that the talking we can try our best to express it, but it sort of stays stuck inside. So this is getting it out. And that has been proven to be really helpful through either movement or through imagery or through sound. Really, really important that we express. And then when you have gotten that thing out, so we call that externalization, then you have this thing that you can engage with. And it's sort of mirroring you back to you. It's a mirror, and then you can make meaning from that. So you can see how there's a process of first just engaging in a making process that's physical that helps people feel better, and then there's expressing it then the externalized product is available for meaning making. So there are different possibilities, and it just depends on the person. It could be that one person would go through all of those. But for example, if you're working with a person with developmental delays who is easily agitated, you may never get to the meaning making phase. Um, but that's fine because you're working in these other domains. And I'm trying to think of other things that, the populations can make a difference. Like somebody who is looking for insight, like, why is it that I keep having problems in my relationships? They might use the final product to learn more. Like, for example, I made this about my relationship with my sister. Well, which one of these is me and which one is my sister? Which one do I consider to be the light and the dark? What is the relationship of these things together? Why did I make it like that instead of a traditional yin yang? That sort of thing. And so you begin to look at the metaphors that come through the artwork.
Wow, that's
That was a long
absolutely
answer.
incredible. No, I love it. I'm learning so much, honestly. I was curious. I wanted to know, like, how do people usually seek out your services, like specifically in art therapy?
That's a great question. So for me, because I've been an art therapist for so long, I started out my career working with adults with developmental delays. And they basically came to like a day school. And so they were, living in some kind of housing situation, and then they would be transported to school. Then I worked in psychiatric inpatient units. So there, people are often involuntarily hospitalized because they might have felt extremely depressed and sort of questioning whether they wanted to be alive, or maybe they were psychotic and they were so confused that they were screaming at people on the street. So they would come to the psychiatric unit, and then, excuse me, we would use art to do that thing of like helping them relax. And then we would also use the art, we would sort of have them make a piece of artwork about how you feel right now. And then if they had time, we would have them make a piece of artwork about what it would be like if they felt better. So we're having them just basically be where they are and then imagine and project into a state of feeling a little bit better. Some of them you couldn't go there because they weren't ready for that. And you always go at the pace that people are ready, but you're trying to soothe them. So you might ask them when it was bad, or what it was when it was bad, what gave you comfort, that sort of thing. So later in my career, I went to a completely different situation. I worked at a resort up in a place called Miraval, which is kind of like Canyon Ranch in Tucson. And so it's a high-end mindfulness resort. So there I was working with clients who were very, um, let's say, they're working well, but their concerns are frequently very, very similar. They're highly agitated, or they work really hard, they're stressed out, they're having problems in their relationships. And so you're really helping them to cope with stress and to feel better in their lives. And now I work, I have sort of a specialized, a couple of specialties. One is because I worked with people with mental illness for so many years. I oftentimes work with families who send somebody in their family to me. And so the family might be the person who solicits the service. But then I'm also helping the family to develop strategies to cope with a person with a mental illness. But then I also work with people that are very, again, very high functioning, but they're really struggling with a high quality of life. They want to be more creative. They want to be happier. They want their relationships to be much more rewarding. They want to be more accepting of um, of their partners, but they find themselves resentful. sort of stuck in negative patterns. So I do a lot of work with people around how to improve the quality of their lives and their relationships. And then I do the psychedelic work, and that is helping people prepare. Very, very important. And there, rightfully, there's a lot of focus right now on integration. And so, people go through either an extraordinary experience or a disturbing experience or a disappointing experience, but they come out of it. And so the art ends up being something we call it sort of capturing the download. So it's helping them process something that is really difficult to put into words. And you're usually not literally translating into words what happened. You are more capturing the essence of either a feeling about it or, sort of again, trying to capture elements of it so that you can come back to it and remember or find symbols in it that are meaningful. So that's the integration piece. But the preparation, the way that art really helps is that it gives people an opportunity to sort of project into what are they hoping to get out of this. So you're getting a baseline also of who they are at this moment. So then when you do have the psychedelic experience, you can have a basis of comparison. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is really helping them prepare to imagine, to deal with some of the control issues that might come up with the ambiguity that arises in the psychedelic experience. And art can be very ambiguous as well. If you've ever tried watercolors or working with clay, so that's the way that I work with people in the psychedelic realm. And there's more to all of these, but so that gives you kind of a little bit of a span over the years, and also the different populations that I currently work with.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. And I wanted to ask, how people reach your practice earlier because I was just curious. I was like, do people just go online and look for an art therapist? So, it really gives some perspective as to how kind of people come into that space and their first interactions with the field of art therapy itself. And I feel like you were right when you mentioned like most of the time people think it's for kids, like most people think art therapy, music therapy is like for kiddos. So thank you for really, diving into that and giving me really an overhaul for how things came together. Before we dive a little bit more deeper, I wanted to ask you, um, you've also been certified as a trauma trauma therapist specialist. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, does that come hand in hand with the art therapy? You spoke about like the different parts of the brain. So tell me a little bit about like how trauma affects the brain and how you got engaged into your work as like a trauma therapist.
Well, the field, or let's say the understanding that trauma impacts us, and there are very few people that escape life without some form of trauma. And sometimes it can be really just a dramatic loss that we experience as traumatic. And so trauma involves both the body and the brain. The brain is in the body, but oftentimes we sort of experience them as different entities. And so, there's biochemistry happening. And and oftentimes people experience it differently. In other words, I have an identical twin sister, and we lived almost very similar lives for at least the first 10 to 12 years of our lives, but we're different human beings. Even in the womb, we were different. We came out differently. And so each person uh, experiences similar events in different ways. And so the experience of trauma can be, it may not seem to be commiserate with the extent of the event, let's say. What we do know, and this is something that now, thankfully, we study much more carefully, is that certain traumas can be cumulative, especially if they happen at an early age. And so that can be experiences of extreme poverty, of exposure to violence, exposure to discrimination. These things take a toll, and we now measure the exposure that somebody had to trauma when they were younger. We also know that stress affects people differently. So there's the what we do test, for example, that are called perceived stress. So how is it that you perceive something, Naomi, and I perceive it? Because how I perceive it may be the measure of why I experience it as stressful. Stress and trauma are slightly different, but they're on a continuum. So when we're the reason why trauma work now matters so much is that what we learned over, I would say, the last 25 years very solidly and clearly is that it is influencing and is a variable that needs to be accounted for when we're looking at other conditions. So, um, whether it's a person who's high functioning but seems to have uh, chronic challenges in a particular area. It could be with self confidence or self sabotaging or something like that. And then when you start to look at actual diagnoses like substance abuse, um, borderline personality disorder, depression, even thought disorders like schizophrenia, that somebody's exposure to trauma, the age that somebody was exposed to it, and the degree, the increase, their role in it, whether they were forced in some ways to also be an agent of harm to another person. These are profoundly uh, impactful on humans, and if we don't understand that, then we're looking at a picture without having a full um, picture, to repeat the word, a full understanding of all that is going into this one uh, particular area that we're focusing on. So in art, what makes it different in art, in looking at art, is that art oftentimes will reveal or give us an indication of, let's say, the flavor of someone's trauma. And yeah, I'm going to cite somebody who is frequently. Um, there are two people that are some of the big names in trauma. One of them is Gabor Mate, but also a man named Bessel van der Kolk. And he wrote a book that we frequently cite in the world of art therapy. He was a guest speaker with the American Art Therapy Association. It must have been 20 years ago, and he was talking about the body keeping the score. But it's not just that the body keeps the score, but it also expresses itself. That trauma gets expressed through the body. And so art is a way for it to be captured and communicated without relying on language, which frequently is absent. So the part of our minds that remembers things in a way to coherently express it goes offline frequently when we are traumatized. So oftentimes people can't remember, for example, what happened because that part of their brain that was sequencing things in sort of linear fashion, it completely goes offline. Art does not go offline. That part of the brain that can express itself through art, it is still present. And so it can express and remember that in a way that the conscious mind cannot. So, and Bessel van der Kolk talked about that. And that's one of the things that as a trauma therapist, I'm relying on, is the fact that the mind has still stored this, and art through the hand will be able to bring that back up in a way that words cannot. Another long answer.
That's actually incredible. I'm learning so much today. And I am a little familiar with Gabor Mate, and also the book The
Good.
Body Keeps Score is was somewhere on my set. So incredible to, just connect those with something that I've also been looking at for a few years now. That's awesome though. Like I really didn't know some of these things that, the part of your brain that does the sequencing, it can only be maybe expressed through art and like other methods. I want to ask you when you're working in all these spaces, you're working in art therapy, you're working in trauma, and then things evolve that, you're also starting to be present in like the psychedelic space. And then you co-founded the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network, which is incredible, by the way. But tell me a little bit about, your experience. What did you see was lacking that you thought that this organization needed to be birthed?
Oh, what a great question. So, I started studying psychedelic therapy about formally. I was first exposed to it in 2018 before the pandemic, and I was I attended an all-day workshop that was run by a woman named Jennifer Allen. She's a psychedelic art therapist, and she did an all-day workshop. I was just attending an event in New York, and I needed continuing education, and I thought, what's something new and different? Because I was presenting on positive psychology, and I said, psychedelics, what's this? So I attended it. Now, I will reveal to you something that's quite important for me personally, and that is that I'm a person in recovery. So when I got into studying art therapy, I also got sober. That was when I was 28. So I'm 61 now. So in 2018, I don't know how old I was. That was 7 years ago, right? 55 or something like that. I was not contemplating doing drugs by a long shot because I'd been sober. It just wasn't even a question for me. And Jennifer Allen was actually talking about holotropic states, which is, and she was referring both to using psychedelics. She now practices with ketamine, but also talking about holotropic breath work. And that is a technique developed by Stanislav Grof, who was studying psychedelics in the actually started studying them in the early 60s, maybe even in the 50s in Czechoslovakia. But then he came to the United States, and then that work of studying patients with LSD was the medicine that he was working with was arrested basically by the Controlled Substances Act. So that's in the early 70s. So he developed this technique that borrowed from Eastern practices. And basically, it was a form of breathing that would get you into a non ordinary state. So I pursued that, which is, has been really helpful. But then at a certain point, I made a decision to experiment with ayahuasca. And so that was, I believe, in 2021. And then I I had also arrived at I'd been working with positive psychology and in the field of art therapy, in particular around this was before we had what we would call homegrown terrorism. So I was working with a collective of people internationally who were looking at strategies for using art to counter violent extremism. But at the time, so this is in, pre-pandemic 2019, 2020, we're thinking of violent extremism as other people coming into a country and engaging in terrorism. When the pandemic hit in our country, and I began to see that, terrorism is something that we've always had in our own country in different forms. And you could just see racial injustice as a form of terrorism. The conclusion that I came to, and it was kind of an unfortunate conclusion, was that art wasn't enough. It's
Mm.
amazing. I think it's the most incredible tool for us to be a witness to what is happening inside. Like, you saw me and then you saw this, and you probably said, "Oh, that was unexpected," or "That's exactly what I expected." So I think of art as being like a phone call to a person, and when you meet them, you say, "Wow, that person is nothing like I thought they would be." Or you say, "Wow, that person is exactly what I thought they would be." So art is kind of like that. It either corrects you, or it gives you something that confirms what you expected. Again, long story. When I came to the conclusion that art wasn't quite enough to really move the needle on our interpersonal challenges. How can I see you, Naomi, beyond this facade? And I learned more and more about psychedelics, and I said, this may be an avenue. Now, we know that it is not a solution, but it definitely lifts a veil around consciousness that I myself could not get through. And so I feel like I've learned things about myself and humanity that they help me learn. You could learn them in other ways. It's not the only way, but it helped me to do it in a way that in 55 years I had not been able to do. So that's what got me. And then, I went through an intensive training through the Integrative Psychiatric Institute. What became clear to me at the end of that was that I had been a therapist for 30 years and I had studied for essentially 2 years, but I had no practical experience being a psychedelic practitioner. So then the last 2 to 3 years have been about immersing myself in sitting with people, being an apprentice. I'm training at the Groff. They're based out of Canada. They changed their name. It's the Groff Psychedelic Training Academy. And so they're one of Groff's legacy training programs, Stanislav Grof, and uh, so I'm in a 3-year long training with them, which is centered around holotropic breath work, but also employs some of the medicines that are legal in Canada. So that's how I came to be doing, this psychedelic. Now, I don't think I answered the question about what brought me to the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network. Should I continue? Okay. So when I started to study psychedelics, it was clear to me that art wasn't there. So it was something that Groff frequently refers to, and he himself was an artist, and he collaborated with an art therapist named Joan Kellogg in the early 70s, as did Bill Richards at the Maryland Psychiatric Institute. What So the way that I saw art being used was that sometimes it would be used for people coming out of a psychedelic experience to kind of transition. We call it transitioning out of the liminal state. So they're still not in, their verbal, let's say, more cognitive realms, and so it was a way to expand and gently come back into that way of processing. But it wasn't really being used for preparation or as a way to sort of get a before and after, because the artwork that I've seen of people just in one session from psychedelics, the transformation is sometimes profound. And the artwork, you can see it. Anybody looking at the artwork, like, it might move from, really impoverished stick figures that are, sort of far away and faceless, to like, there's one patient that I worked with, and her second image was a leaf full of green and all of the veins of the leaf and full of new life. And before, she had just drawn these tiny little stick figures with this mass of anxiety. That was one ketamine session. It was night and day. And I thought, but she recognized it. She looked at her image and she could see herself reflected back to herself. It also can tell us if somebody's ready for the work, because sometimes people aren't ready for the work. They really, especially people who have never done psychedelics before, or sometimes people with personality disorders. I think it can be very helpful, but you really want to give them a long ramp up to deal with what it's like to be completely out of control. And so that's really uncomfortable for some people. So experimenting with art supplies, and then again at the end of the experience, how do you capture this thing that disappears almost instantly? Well, you can't, again, capture it literally unless you're Alex or Allison Gray. I mean, there are these amazing artists. There's a man named Pablo Amaringo who is famous because he could remember every single detail, and he would make these incredibly intricate paintings that had every single little element. Most of us aren't going to do that, but we might capture an essence of it. And then we can revisit that or even build a series of images and 10 years later instantly come back to it. So art belongs in different places. It also, because of the neuroplasticity that is generated by the psychedelics, it it kind of expands our creativity, and art is also a way to generate creativity. So you put them together and you get this synergy.
Absolutely. That's really beautifully put with, synergy. And I'm glad that you're doing this work because it's so unique. And one of my favorite words is like intersectionality. And it just intersects all these things that are so important to a human being's life. Like art is so essential to us. And then psychedelics is something that I feel like we're kind of discovering it as a humankind. Like again, it's been there, of course, in many native communities, but as I feel like not right now it's kind of making a comeback in like more like modern or Western what civilizations, whatever you want to call it. Um,
I love that
but
word.
that's,
I,
really
I was going to say,
exciting.
I love that word intersectionality because, I think we are intersecting identities and cultures, and the nice thing about art is that it 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 can hold many different, uh, let's say, identities, but realities, and they can be contradictory, paradoxical, which is what we know about psychedelics, that they can be paradoxical. But art can hold that, and it does it through the unique language of the person. So you get to see them, as a Caucasian woman. But how does this emerge uniquely for me, Caucasian woman versus my twin sister, identical person, very similar intersectionalities, but then the individual expressing herself. So you get the personal, the collective, the culture. It really is so magical, really, as far as I'm concerned, in being able to represent different aspects of the personal self and the universal self.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it's funny that we're having this conversation today because I was talking to my sister last night and it just I don't remember how it came up, but I was telling her, I feel like I had a good childhood. I was like, I was a happy child. Like I was like, I don't really have any complaints. And she just looked at me and she was like, really? Just because she felt like her experience was very different from mine. Yeah, we have a few years between us. But she was like, I have to write about this. She's like, how can, we have such different perspectives, even though for the most part, like we had a similar situation for like a period of time. So, it's so exciting that we're having this conversation today, for me. What I wanted to also like talk about a little bit was like, how your perspective of just like life itself of what you have had over like 55 years then changed after like one experience with psychedelics, and how profound it can be in the human experience, that psychedelics can be teachers for things that, maybe we will never know in our lives. And on other podcasts, they're like, oh, all the world leaders need to just do some shrooms and stuff like that. But actually, like, maybe they do. I also want to ask you, you told me you're taking training in Canada. How has, you're also working with different folks who are, trying to get legislation passed with the Psychedelic Science Conference. That was something that was also front and center. Tell me a little bit about if it's been difficult trying to do some of your work here in the United States, how you're working with collaborators outside the US, if you are working with any.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just quickly go back to the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network. So, because it somewhat relates to your question. When I began to notice that art wasn't really represented other than, by people that were considered to be really talented, I started to look for all of the art therapists who were doing this work. And there are quite a few of them out there, quite a few up in Canada, but also over in Europe. And so I started to reach out even in Latin America and in Africa. There are other people that are exploring psychedelics, and also other people who have identified, art belongs here. And so, because I'm later in my career. I mean, I essentially could be retired right now if I wanted to, but I sort of feel passionate about this project of creating a place where people who are interested in how they can use art, either as a practitioner. Naomi, if you're a practitioner, where would I learn more about art therapy? Or in this work, or I'm an art therapist, where do I find other art therapists? Or I'm a person who just wants to process the experience, and I understand that art can be a helpful tool. I said, let's build an organization where people can come and find this if they want it. Um, the the legislative component of it probably affects us a little bit less. But for example, I was talking to Larry Norris today because we're talking about running a workshop in Oakland, and Larry Norris is one of the founders of Decriminalize Nature. And so you can imagine that his work, whenever we're talking about anything, it's in the context of decriminalizing medicines. And so he and I are talking about running a workshop down in Brazil with a man named Luis Eduardo Luna. And so we're talking about medicines, relative to Latin America versus the United States. Again, he's much more familiar with the policy, but it it's going to influence it regardless. And I believe that he and I are going to run a workshop together in Oakland in April that is around the rub between using natural plants and man-made plants. Excuse me, man-made psychedelic synthetic substances, LSD, MDMA, et cetera, ketamine, which aren't traditional psychedelics, but they're in that family. And so the legalities are always sort of on the fringes because, even if I'm talking about the people up in Canada, MDMA is legal up there. It isn't legal down here. So if I go up to Canada at this time, that is a substance that I can use in my training in addition to ketamine, which in the United States, really legally, you can only access marijuana, in some places, psilocybin and ketamine. So, these are whenever you're doing any kind of clinical work, the implications of this is always on the surface, and then the relationship with the cultures that have held these medicines is very different in the US versus Latin America versus Europe versus Africa versus Canada. So all of these things are engaging, even if it's not completely the topic at the a moment like art, but it's there because it's always there. Did that make sense?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I feel like it's a challenge, and it's good that we're like all making small steps towards, legalization and really just being able to use these gifts from nature um, instead of like just like pharmaceuticals. But it's small steps that we're taking every day. So I'm really glad that we got to speak a little bit about that because I feel like it's a big conversation right
Yeah,
now. And like you said, whenever you're working with it, it's like it's nagging in the back of your head. And as an industry, it's like always something that's going on. Whenever I read a newsletter, there's at least like one section about legalization because it's just so big. But I hope we keep moving more and more in like the right direction.
agreed.
Yeah, incredible. Um, You've also um you also have like different coloring books. You spoke about like community and why working with other people is really essential in your work. Can you dive a little bit into how you are empowering people by giving them tools like that in their hands, like the coloring book, and then again how you're bringing them together? Like, why is that so essential?
So I developed the coloring book because when I um our field went through a big controversy when the coloring craze hit, mostly in the pandemic, and there was kind of an uproar about coloring books basically diminishing creativity or, um, being infantilizing somehow. But I had been using them for my entire career because sometimes people need a place to start. So I also use mandalas, which a mandala in its purest form is just a circle. There's a lot of questions about mandalas. Is there a chance that it might be cultural appropriation to be using a symbol that is a part of other traditions? Sometimes people associate them with Tibetan religious practices like sand paintings, although they don't actually call them mandalas. They have a Tibetan word for it. But the idea of having a structure. So the more structure it is for people that have difficulty, um, let's say, just creating something on their own. And it doesn't mean that you're artistic or not. Like, anybody can say, I don't really know where to begin. Well, if you give them a coloring image, the artistic choices may be around the material that they use. Some colorists use really sophisticated art materials and they shade things very carefully. And so, yes, the structure was made by someone else, but the choices are theirs. They might go outside of the image, they might improvise. Uh, and so like the mandala, for example, I find extremely useful because again, it's just a circle, but it's inside and outside. So when people engage with this inside outside thing, what do they put inside? What do they put outside? I frequently give a directive. I used to do this at Miraval because I only had an hour to basically do everything, like 1 hour to wow somebody with some kind of new revelation. I was never going to see him again. So I would have them draw in a mandala symbols for things that they valued, that were important to them or impacted their lives. So it could be good or bad. And then they'd have the circle and they'd say, well, am I supposed to do something inside the circle or outside? And I would say, I don't know.
Hmm.
You can use the circle, you can flip the page. What feels right to you? And then they would engage with this. Sometimes they'd flip it over and wouldn't use the circle at all because people that are really creative, a lot of times, are not creative. It's more like they're outside of the box, and that feels restrictive to them. Um, I'm not going to say creative because it's more like a style of operating in the world. Like I'm going to create my own model. But some people are creative, but they like to start out with a little bit of structure. And then the coloring sheets are lots of structure. And but that can be what it takes, or that might be what is needed to get somebody started. So you want to get people into the action, and people need different warm-ups for that. Did I answer your question?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's incredible. Yeah, I really like that, honestly. I didn't know there was a controversy around the coloring
Oh,
books,
yeah, it
but
was a
that's
huge
I f-
controversy. It was because some people also thought that, they believe that art should be original. But that is actually a cultural norm, and it's a Western European cultural norm that creativity should be original, unique, a signature. That is not the that does not emerge in all cultures. In fact, having a sort of unique signature is considered hubristic or, um, immodest in some cultures.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with me. I shared this with you during our previous conversation, but when I was producing the Castle Rock Art Festival, a short film for it, which is up on the channel. And someone I talked to said to me, I asked, my question was, for someone who might not just has trouble with that like first step of like their journey into art and becoming an artist or just drawing, painting, whatever it is. I asked, what is your advice? And she said to me, the best advice that I have is to have a reference point, to have a picture as a reference point, and then starting from there. So now when you're telling me that, it's just part of like one culture where like art has to be original and it's considered immodest in others, it just connects it to that. And I feel like I feel like it's a heavy weight off like the shoulders of people like myself, who are just dabbling and want to become more serious about their art or like creativity in general. So that's very empowering. I love to hear that.
Something you're
As
reminded. Do you mind if I was gonna
Yeah, go ahead.
say that I did a lot of consultation around creativity, how to help people get more creative, which some people equate artistic, skill with creativity. The most important thing is to get people out of thinking about it and into action. So when we were at the Psychedelic Science Conference, we had a booth and we had all of these people walk by, and we had them do one or two very simple things. And so I would suggest even that you and I do this. So grab a piece of scrap paper anywhere, try to make it white just so that we have a similar, and then grab a black pen, a black ballpoint pen if you got one. Is yours ballpoint?
That's close enough.
Close enough. Okay. Is it a marker?
No, it's a pen,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, so I'm gonna see if I can
I
find it.
found one.
Actually, I'm not gonna waste my time on that. I'm just gonna use my pen. So, you're gonna, without thinking too much about this, you're gonna very quickly make a line for how you feel at this moment. So, a quick line for how you feel at this moment. Okay. And
All
so
right, I'm
out
ready.
in the audience, do the same thing. Okay. Make a quick line for how you feel at this moment. So the next thing that you're going to do, you're going to make a symbol for who you are at this moment. And just, short and sweet. So to the audience, and when you look back over this, Naomi, you'll see this. Those of you in the audience will see what happened to Naomi's eyes. The first question was draw a line or make a line, because I move away from the draw, because drawing makes people anxious. So I say make a line for how you feel at this moment. So Naomi basically looked inward to check in with her body. How do I feel at this moment? Then, when I asked her to draw a symbol, her eyes went up and then she looked up. And this is an aspect of brain spotting. So her mind is moving up into imagining. Now you're thinking symbolically. So why that matters is you just did art therapy. The first one was a somatic check-in and the second one is symbolic formation. So hold your piece up and I'm going to hold up mine. Okay, hold yours up a
Can you
little
see
bit.
it?
Can you can't Oh, there we go. Okay, good. And so you and I'm going to assume that the bottom ones are the symbols, right?
The
Yeah,
symbols,
and
correct.
so notice mine is these curly cues, and yours is
Yeah.
more like a graph almost, and mine
Yeah.
you probably can tell this, for those of the viewers, that mine is done quicker and slightly more spontaneously, and yours is a little more, um, regulated, so it tells me that you're I'm not going to overanalyze it, but I can tell that there isn't a lot of agitation, even though it fluctuates. There's some degree of measure and control. And then the symbol, you actually drew two symbols.
Yeah.
And so that tells me that that one wasn't enough. Bring it a little closer if you can. Yeah, there we go. There we see it. Yeah. And so one of those symbols, if not both of them, most of us in the world are going to recognize, as you will the one that I have. But we don't necessarily need to talk about that, but we spend less than a minute on that, and yet anybody approaching these images would understand on some level what you were communicating and what I was communicating. So that is a way to warm people up. Now, if you and I were now to jump into doing a more intensive art process, our minds would be warmed up. You need to do that with art because people will not even, I need a warm up. And part of what I do is I have art materials around. So when somebody comes in and I know that they're going to make art, I've got this kind of thing lying around because their mind starts to warm up to it, even though they may say, oh boy, I got to do art. And then I do something really simple. I might even just say, think about it. Think about a symbol. Because in groups, I will do that. I'll say, if there were a color for love, people will say red, pink, but then somebody will say brown or they'll say purple. People have, traditional responses, and then there'll be some people that have unique ones. And then you say a symbol, and
Mhm.
almost everybody says heart, but somebody will say a sun or something like that. But you get them thinking symbolically. So, so when you're moving into doing art, it helps to warm people up. The other thing you can do is just make marks. And when I work with people that are agitated, I have them use their non-dominant hand and just make marks for 2 to maybe even 10 minutes, just using their non-dominant hand, and eventually they calm down.
Wow. That's incredible. That was a very fun
Yay!
exercise and just like a great starting point. Um, and when we talk about expression, externalization, something that I was thinking about even when we were just creating this was like art does not really have a language. So like I'm bilingual and a lot of people that I know who are bilingual just like kind of sometimes zone out on one language, right? It's just like so hard to find the words. And it's also difficult to communicate in like a second language, for example, right? And I was just thinking the whole time like how freeing, exhilarating, and universal this language of art is, and then also on a deeper level, how we can, utilize it to communicate how we're feeling, who we are, where we are in our journeys. So it's just so powerful. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm most passionate about, and art therapists have different things. Like some people just love that it helps people regulate. I love that. But the piece that I think is most profound is that, and this was something that we credit, not that he invented this idea, but Carl Jung, with this idea of the collective unconscious, which is another thing that I think is profound about psychedelics, is that we tap into an experience of humanity that is not culturally bound. So there are things about color, about shape, about the visual dynamics. Like when you see this, a circular form radiating outward, it communicates to you, or you see something that has two parts, you understand a duality. And when one is, dramatically contrasting to another, I don't need to explain that to you. Like the yin yang, everybody fundamentally understands it because it is universal. And this is not just a proposition in the psychological world, it is substantiated in the anthropological world. So every culture, beyond, bar none, perceives the sun to be male and the moon to be female. Bar none. It now, the sun is not male and the moon is not female, but we do understand that it may have something to do with the cycles, with the ocean, with the month. The ocean is frequently seen to be female and the sky male, and these are universal. They emerge in almost every culture. Maybe there are some that we haven't studied, but so the fact that like you're saying, that we can communicate, that we understand fundamentally. Now we may need to have a conversation about it, and you may have a personal reason that you chose, like I chose this and I chose to modify it for personal reasons. I'm a twin. But and so that going into what is personal and what is universal. But frequently people are operating in the personal, and they don't realize that they're also communicating in a universal way, and that Naomi, without meeting me, hearing my words, anything, can get something about that image.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely incredible. And I feel like it also opens up a whole new side to art. Like art is of course so powerful. I rant about that all the time. A lot of my work that I do, I'm always trying to put artists up, support artists, like support the
Thank
work
you.
of art in general. But just having this conversation now, my eyes been open to a whole different side of it, right? This intersectionality that it can have with psychedelics and how it can change people's life. And while we're on the topic of like this universal communication, something we touched on briefly earlier, but I want to dive a little bit more deeper into it is like how important it is to kind of do these things while in community, while in other people. You touched a little bit about how we ourselves are different when we're with other people. So let's just to tie it in together, why is it essential for you to like have your workshops with groups of people, and how is that different from like working with an individual? What do they get from it?
Yeah, I think they both have their value. I mean, I think anybody, when they're feeling vulnerable, understands that sometimes you just want one person, especially perhaps when you're doing a heroic dose of medicine. You may feel like the first time that you do that, you want, just one safe person there, because being in a group might be overwhelming. And, people are going through very different things, and it might trigger somebody, again, if there's a history of trauma, set and setting, or critical. But I've always been a group therapist. I was trained under the model of a man named Irvin Yalom. He's he basically is known most for existential group therapy, but he really believed that there is something that happens when we are exploring whatever it is that comes up in psychological work. It doesn't have to be therapy, because psychedelics isn't always therapy. It might be for growth, personal growth. But there is something, the universality component, most especially, is that we witness other people as aspects of ourselves and they see us as aspects of themselves. And it's a way that we are no longer separate in our little husks. And art helps you to also feel connected to humanity. So you're you're expanding that capacity to see yourself. We know about the ego dissolution, but then you're also connecting. So you're not just dissolving me, but you're also connecting to us. And then the art is a way to see that. How did that happen in this moment? It wasn't just that my ego dissolved, it's that it dissolved and I experienced a magical interlude with Naomi where we became the trees and we moved with them. And so I might draw Naomi as a tree and me as a tree. But then coincidentally, Naomi drew something. And then, we're speaking through the language of our experience, personal, and then the universal is coming through it, both of what we went through and the art. So it's layering. It's so rich.
Wow, yeah, that is so rich. I love it. Like layering. I'm learning so many things today. And I want to also ask you about earlier we spoke about, like small art as opposed to like large pieces of art. So how does that come into this work in general?
Well, that I came to that conclusion in my process as an artist, but also as a person. So I'll, just tell you a very quick, rather intense story, but it is relevant to this conversation, and that is that I had been a fine artist. So I made big pieces like that, and everything was big. Everything was, painting. I was very perfectionistic about my art. So I would often not do art because it had to be good art, right? And when I was in my early 40s, sadly, my brother died. And it was a devastating loss for my family. It was kind of our first encounter with unexpected death. And I did not cope with it well. And my husband and I moved to another country, unrelated. But I was kind of cut off. It was in the early 2000s, so we didn't have I think the best that we had was Skype at the time. We certainly did not have Zoom, so I'm very disconnected, and I've just gone through a major loss. And I thought to myself, I'm an art therapist. Why am I not using this? Because I was journaling, and it was the same old thing. It was just verbal vomit.
Mm,
And so I
mhm.
started, and I'd never liked mandalas, but I needed some kind of structure. And I thought, I don't even want to make a piece of artwork this big. That's too much. So I made these little pieces of paper that were 4 by 4, and I just drew a bunch of mandalas. And every day I would make marks. I would copy something from a magazine. Sometimes if I just had a magazine, I would draw a mandala on it and draw over the magazine image. But I was so in so much pain that words could not capture it. And so for years I did this, and it just became a habit. And so now I have literally thousands of these little art thoughts, and some of them are unbelievably beautiful drawings, and others are completely forgettable. And some of them are just words like, FFF, or, or it might just be colors, and just a really boring piece of artwork. But it was a way to be able to use art in a conversational way with myself, and have the consequences not be this has to be pretty. And then when I look back at the images, I mean, that was now 20 years ago. It's incredible to see the difference, because I was really quite depressed at that time. and now and I'm a different person then. But I'm still Rebecca, right? So you can see me, but you can see a different version of me. So it tracks my relationship with myself. Now, if we waited for me to make big paintings about myself, we wouldn't have that really that almost if you did a flip thing in a video, you would just see the daily passage of Rebecca through art. But it's lowercase art. I call it lowercase art, A with a lowercase. Some people call it
Yeah.
small art or everyday art, there are different expressions for it.
Yeah, that's absolutely incredible. I'm so sorry to hear about your brother. I bet that never gets easier, but I am glad that you found something for you that was able to help you during some of the lowest points. And I'm also grateful that, you shared it with our audience and myself, so that that can be a tool in our toolbox for us.
Absolutely.
Wow, what a
Yeah,
conversation.
and, that
Um,
reminds me, and I'm not I don't like to make a plug for myself, like, we've got the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network, but something that was really important to me as when I was running my business, which is I still run, it's my private practice, and the workshops that I do that are not psychedelic related, is the creative well-being workshops, and I have a bunch of free downloads that you can go to there. It's under the resource section because I really wanted people to be able to get tools. So there's one on demystifying creativity. So it's really talking about how do you warm yourself up to doing artwork. There's another one that's on mandalas and the history of mandalas. And then there's another one that some of them arts related, some of them are mental health related. But there's another one that's on creative journaling, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, where you're really like you can be writing and doing artwork together. Some people like this one is actually creative journaling because you can see places where I'm writing. This is about an ayahuasca journey because I was down in Ecuador. And this is an experience that I had with the shaman and the medicine, but I'm writing about it as I'm drawing. So this is not meant to be a visually captivating piece of artwork. It's meant to capture the download, right? So I'm writing and processing my experience at the same time. So that's we call that either visual journaling or creative journaling. So there's a handout, and these are free. There's you don't need to do a thing. You don't even need to sign up on my website. It's just meant for you to access it.
Amazing. No, I love that you're plugging it because I was actually just gonna ask you that. But Rebecca, I'm sure so many folks have just taken so many tools and so many new knowledge as I have from this conversation. But please go ahead and let us know, like, where can they find you? Where can they find your workshops? I know you have one coming up in April that you mentioned, but where can they find you? Like, how can they get in touch with you? If there are any aspiring art therapists at the end of this conversation, also, just let us know where they can find you and your work.
Absolutely. So, if you're interested in art therapy in any capacity, feel free to reach out to me. I feel like one of the places or the reasons that I'm here on this planet is to make that available to people as a tool. It really feels like a mission. So anybody, you don't have to become a client. You don't have to become a therapist, an art therapist. So that is through creative well-being workshops. My email is Rebecca at Creative Wellbeing Workshops. And, that's really where I'm doing my client work. So even if you're interested in psychedelics and art therapy and you wanted to become a client, I would be taking you through that. The Psychedelic Art Therapy Network is really a place for people to come learn, find art therapists, find other resources that are related to psychedelics in general, and then we would have events listed there. So in April, we have not formalized this, so we're not ready to make an announcement. But I'll be doing a workshop with Larry Norris, and that's I'm not even sure. It's going to be towards the end of April. Then Alyssa Gursky, who is one of the co-founders of the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network, the other co-founder is Katie Bragagnolo. Alyssa and I are going to be running a workshop through the Shulgin Foundation on May 9th. And the Shulgin Foundation it's actually the place where Sasha Shulgin and his wife Anne Shulgin, he was experimenting. He's one of the people that is credited with the final formulation of MDMA. And he continued to experiment with synthesizing psychedelic medicines, even though it was illegal, at his farm in Oakland, California. So they have a foundation, and we're going to be running a workshop for practitioners who want to learn how to work with art and medicine together. So that will be on the 9th. And these will be announced on the website as we start to do more of the promotional material. And then we'll be teaching more through the Psychedelic Art Therapy Network, just basically continuing education for practitioners who want to get some introductory information again about how to combine psychedelics and art therapy based practices. So it's not art therapy, but it's how to incorporate art ethically and safely into psychedelic work.
Wow, very exciting. And I'm going to be linking all your links down below so folks can just scroll up and get get your resources. Check out Rebecca's website and some of the upcoming workshops. I'm so excited to just have had this conversation. And Rebecca, I also want to say thank you to you for not also being here tonight, but just for your constant support through our production of Psychedelics: A Journey. You came while we were filming, and we're like, what can I do to help? How can I support you guys? And for me, just being a little bit like newer to that space, it's been so nice, having someone that I know that I can ask questions to, and I can like rely on their support. So, on behalf of everyone who's in production of Psychedelics: A Journey, I just want to say thank you. And I'm going to be getting in touch with you very soon as the release comes up as well. But yeah, if you have any last words for our audience, otherwise we will be wrapping up
Well,
shortly.
Naomi, you are such a pleasure. I have thoroughly enjoyed our exchanges, and I am a resource to you, and we are collaborating, all of us together. And I really believe in your efforts and stand behind them 100%. And so, whatever we can do to help you out in the audience, that is really what we're here for. And so, I am a resource to you in perpetuity, and I would love to continue to collaborate and just see how we can help you evolve as you are helping us evolve by doing this. I mean, this is unbelievably helpful to us because we want to get the word out there as a resource. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Rebecca. That is so sweet, and I really appreciate that. That means everything to me.
Yay.
Yeah, like, keep doing what you're doing. I'm inspired by your work, as I'm sure a lot of folks are, after watching this. And, I learned so much today, which is so exciting. I love learning more, but I think to learn a lot of things from a conversation, especially within like a short span of an hour, that's exciting. Like that doesn't happen in every
Yeah, and if
conversation.
I
So I'm so
you mind
grateful
if I
to
say
you.
one last thing, and that is that I have been
Oh, please go ahead.
accused of being a little wordy and intellectual and academic. So if there's anything that I said that got a little heady for you out in the audience and was difficult for you to grasp, please don't hesitate to reach out because I want to make it accessible. I write about the stuff sometimes that I get sort of in intellectual talk, but really this should be designed for you out there to be able to to navigate so that you have a tool that gives you access to your own consciousness, to yourself, a way to relate to other people. So that is my mission and purpose. And so if I did that well, good. If I didn't, and you had, something that sort of was confusing to you, just don't even hesitate for a minute to reach out to me 'cause we'll just have a conversation about it.
Amazing, Rebecca. And I know you said earlier that like, you could be retired by this age, but I think there is a big reason that you're not. I think you have a big purpose, and I feel just from like speaking to you that you've aligned with that purpose, and you're bringing all these new things to people, and you're tackling topics that really need like they need help for humans to thrive in the
Yeah.
future. So on behalf of like all of us, and especially like all young people who are like, trying to kind of make it in this time, we're just so grateful for you. So
Back
yeah,
at
I
ya.
think that's it.
Mhm.
Thank you
And you
so
didn't
much.
point
All
out
right,
to
everyone.
everyone that we were wearing matching.
We were
Yeah,
matching. I hope they
that's
noticed.
synchronicity.
We're like aligned
Yes,
universally. We're just like,
absolutely. Alright, my friend.
I
We
love
will
it.
follow
All
up.
right.
Thank you to everyone in the audience. I'm here if needed, and, this is just the beginning.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for watching. See you next time.